Bakemonogatari is, well, it's a thing. It's not quite an action series, though it has that. It's not quite a solely supernatural series in the traditional sense, though it features that heavily. And it's also not quite a romantic comedy, though that depends on your definition of romance. So really, it's a thing. Adapted from the light novel of the same name by writer whose name I'm not going to attempt to butcher pronunciation of. And that was adapted back in 2009 by Studio Shaft, and its resident artiste, chief director, Akiyuki Shimbo. Bakemonogatari is a series and now an entire anime franchise that people have sworn by as one of their favorite anime since its inception due to its interesting characters, unique visual style, and its plot. But largely, it's a series that I've previously avoided for a variety of reasons. Being an Aniplex property has actually made getting a copy of it stupidly expensive historically. A good chunk of the franchise's story is tied up in several films that have even worse availability in the West, and to be honest, with few exceptions, I found that any work with Akiyuki Shimbo attached to it gets more praise for being deep and meaningful than it actually deserves. But today, it's high time that I finally take a look at the series that's now over a decade old and see not only how it holds up compared to many of the shows that have followed in its wake, but also try to imagine how the me of 10 years ago might have enjoyed it. So, ladies and gentlemen and others, my name is Okada, and welcome to Glass Reflection, where today we're looking at Bakemonogatari. Let's jam. Bakemonogatari is a series I wouldn't necessarily describe as good. It's not a series I would actively recommend to people, nor is it one that I personally found engrossing as something to watch. But it is a series that is interesting. It has many elements to it that it wants to explore, and I can't say that it doesn't find unique ways to showcase those elements. But the show, to me, is a constant battle between two things: wanting to show how intelligent it actually is, while also showcasing how much of a pervert the main character can be. The series is a combination of character arcs involving supernatural elements, loosely strung together by connection to our protagonist, Araragi. Araragi is a half-human former vampire oddity who, while still having his humanity, also retains several vampiric abilities from his backstory, such as regeneration. And instead of realizing how dangerous and deadly interactions with the supernatural world can be, and just walking away from it, he decides that despite not being an expert in supernatural dealings, he should take it upon himself to become chief exorcist of the area. Thus, he involves himself in many supernatural phenomena likely to get him killed, as long as it's a service to a woman in need. I've known for a long time that Bakemonogatari has been a staple, as it were, for the slew of anime about a protagonist whose sole job throughout the series is to solve the problems of various female characters. While it is not the originator of this format by any stretch, because visual novel adaptations have been a thing long before Monogatari came along, I don't think it's actually true to say that Araragi as a protagonist is actually there to solve problems, even if that's what he sometimes ends up doing. The first arc of the series even takes great pains to specify this, with a famous line of the series stating that the only one who can solve the problems of these characters are the characters themselves. It's this inner reflection that the characters have to face, which makes the show worth watching as they wrestle with their internal problems and the more supernatural external results of that. But even then, I have to constantly question if anything actually gets solved. More often than not, in this first season, the root cause of any problem is not the issue that gets resolved. Instead, they only patch up the more obvious symptoms of the greater problem. Senjougahara's home life that caused her supernatural weight problems isn't really dealt with, only the weight issue itself. One could make the clear argument that Araragi was one of the major problems with Kanbaru to begin with, and Hanekawa's problems are less solved and rather just further repressed by Shinobu until, presumably, a later arc can finally deal with it. For the show's talk of having the heroines being the only ones that can solve their problems, there's plenty of unsolving to be seen. And when things actually do get fixed, it is Araragi that resolves the situation. Well, sort of. Much of this initial season had me asking what his purpose actually is. He mostly just seems to be a ferryman of sorts, to guide our characters to Oshino, who ends up providing the solution more often than not that Araragi just acts upon. usually unsuccessfully. For a series that has the word story in the title, though, I actually found that the overall story is actually one of the least interesting things about it. By contrast, it's the individual stories that are much more potent entertainment. It reminds me a lot of why I like shows like Mushishi, with its taking of Japanese folklore and turning that into supernatural phenomena that the Mushi master Ginkgo attempts to solve or mitigate with his knowledge. Every arc of Bakemonogatari brings in a new supernatural problem. It's not necessarily an original problem, as like Mushishi, there are plenty of references to myths and folklore. Cause like, if somebody tried to tell me that Bakemonogatari was the originator of the monkey's paw, I'd look at them and laugh. But to be fair, Bake takes these tales and reimagines them into more modern settings. And that's one of the best things about the series. And then the show had to go be all sexual about it. So, there is a particularly negative discourse to be had when discussing Bakemonogatari and its more sexually charged content. Some people believe that the constant panty shots, naked women, and sexual harassment of underage characters are not really important to the plot necessarily, but are rather just jokes that are not to be taken seriously. That they are just the aspects that need to be included in order to make the series cater to a larger audience when its deeper themes would have lost them otherwise. Other people are of the mind that it's all intentional, and that the risque content is itself just a reflection of the main character's repressed desires, and it is absolutely essential for the development of the characters. It's a deconstruction of fan service in anime, they might say. There are also some people who say that the show is not sexual at all. That is an opinion I've seen, and really I think that if that is one you hold, you might need to get your eyes checked. Possibly. But this is why coming up with my own take hasn't been easy, mostly because I see both the truth and flaws to many of these arguments. So here's how I choose to look at it. You can say that Senjougahara's walking around naked has some secret meaning, how her comments about clothes being too heavy given her weightless nature point to something more. And you might be right about that, but I'm not one to say that someone's view of the scene is wrong by not picking up on that. It's an issue that I have when writers are being vague about something. If the meaning is not explicitly clear, then really whatever meaning that the watcher takes from it is just as valid as the next. I don't believe that anyone looking at this scene who just writes it off as fan service is necessarily wrong in that assumption, nor do I disagree with any essays that people have written on this scene's hidden message about the characters. We all have different takeaways, and that leads us to all having different opinions on the series itself, which is great. If we all had the same opinion, I'd probably be out of the job. So yes, there are plenty of sexually charged representations and scenes in Bakemonogatari, and this first season doesn't even have the scene. And Monogatari fans know exactly what scene I'm talking about. However you interpret these scenes is entirely up to you, but they are important because, honestly, how you react to them and whether or not you enjoy them is definitely going to be like the biggest indicator of your enjoyment level for the series as a whole. Like, I don't necessarily like them, and found that more often than not, it led me to an even worse opinion of Araragi as the series progressed. But, you know, sneaking up on an underage girl only to grope her and then question why she fights back will have that effect. But there are times when I did feel like a meaning could be taken from it. If only the show didn't flaunt its fan service so much to make me tired of it. It's the difference between opening a bag of chips and then just eating a handful versus downing the whole bag. Moderation is key. The show's lack of it at times is what ultimately made it a harder watch for me than it could have been. And I'm sure there are plenty of people down in the comments now mentioning how I watched the show wrong or how I just don't understand, but can't win them all. I said at the start of the video that Bakemonogatari is a series that is very hard to recommend, and that's an opinion that shouldn't be controversial either. I'd like to hope. And I'm not just talking about the show's fan service, though that is a huge turnoff for many, but just how most of the rest of the show is presented. There are entire episodes that are not much more than two characters having a long and involved conversation about highly detailed subjects that only loosely tie into the plot events. And for many, that's not something that's easy to follow. It has a very Seinfeld nature to the conversations, and one could largely describe them as just circular conversations about nothing. But at least Seinfeld had a layer of humor to that nothingness to make the dialogue more interesting. Like, you almost need to rewatch some scenes in Bakemonogatari multiple times just to get a grasp on where and why a conversation takes a particular turn, which only slows down the experience. Only then to have to stop the experience entirely in order to read all the text. Not only are most of the conversations very word heavy, but most scenes are constantly overlaid with smash cuts to text-filled scenes with descriptions, inner monologues, and the like that are never on screen long enough to read them properly. Watching on a computer is almost essential to be able to pause quickly enough to catch the text and then read it. But that just further slows everything down more. And I'd never say to skip the text though, because all of it is purposeful and it might just be, easier to read in Japanese for Japanese readers in order to get the gist of it as it quickly passes on. But I could never get that with the English translated text. It might just be subliminal, and if that's the argument you're gonna go for, sure, but I feel like it's there for a purpose and I should be able to read it. This whole experience just exemplifies the kinds of things you need to be okay with in order to get the most out of this series, and also the type of mindset you need to be in before even starting the first episode. If you're not prepared enough for that, then there's a good chance that you might come away with an even less impressed outlook on the series than I did. It's probably why I took so long in actually attempting to tackle the series as well, because I knew of all of this years ago. Watching Bakemonogatari and then moving on to the rest of the Monogatari series is a commitment. Like I said, I would try to imagine myself 10 years ago and how he might have enjoyed this series, but I have a feeling that I would have liked it even less then. I just had a big problem with harem tropes back in the day, and while it's still a sticking point that I have kept, I'm not as harsh on it as I once was. Like, I still don't want to watch Love Hina again, even though I can appreciate it for what it was and how it affected the medium, but it doesn't mean that I have to enjoy it, which is really a summary of my thoughts on Bakemonogatari as a whole. Bakemonogatari is a visually impressive series at times, and I can appreciate it for its rich characters and many of the themes and takes on the supernatural. But that's as far as I go. As for the rest, well, it's indeed a thing, I guess. And so, with all of that in mind, after meticulously considering my thoughts on the categories of story, characters, animation, sound, and my own personal enjoyment, after which, not inflicting the rating with possibly needless amounts of fan service because I respect it more than that, has me awarding Bakemonogatari with the rating of... Okay, let's back up a second and talk about something, because people know that I have ratings that I like to give shows. There's skip it if I hate it and found it deplorable, watch it or stream it if it's interesting enough to see, but not absolutely amazing. Buy it because even if you can't own it physically, it has enough to it to be worth having it on your shelf, either physically or digitally. And finally, there's the rating of Certified Frosty, a rating for, and I quote, the best of the best, or those shows too important to ignore. It's that last line, that last caveat to the Certified Frosty rating that has me a little bit conflicted with how I want to rate Bakemonogatari. Because I didn't necessarily enjoy the experience, but I can see where others would, and that normally would have me giving it a stream it rating accordingly. But given the show's reputation, even though I would never have considered such a thing 10 years ago, it does qualify as an anime that one might say is too important to ignore. But for the microcosm that is this video, I don't think that the solution is an easy one, because it requires a bit more thought than I currently have time for in order to complete this video. Really, what I need to do is just rejig the rating scheme to account for shows that are either slowly becoming classics or shows that are important to the anime lexicon, even if I don't particularly find them entertaining. So when I eventually do fix the rating system, maybe by just calling it a classic rating or something, then Bakemonogatari will fit under that. But for now, it's just getting a watch it rating, as it's hard to recommend given its content, but still neither irredeemable or not worth watching. Now, since the series is available from Aniplex, it has been a bit of a pain to own. Their box set for Bakemonogatari was one of their first in North America, and it's never dropped in price since then, really. So even while later entries of the Monogatari series are a bit more reasonably priced, for Aniplex, anyway, this first entry is the outlier that makes it difficult to own. Thankfully, though, it is available for streaming over on Crunchyroll. But Aniplex never gave Crunchyroll the Blu-ray rips, so it's probably one of the worst ways to watch it. Not only is the quality capped at 480p, but as with so many other Shaft shows, there are plenty of changes made to the Blu-rays of the series that were not in the original TV broadcast. So owning and watching the Blu-rays would be preferable, but it is a significant financial commitment. As far as alternate anime recommendations, my answers are somewhat obvious. First, my teen romantic comedy, Snafu, is an example of a series that does similar things as Bakemonogatari, but is far more palpable for most people. I personally found it far more entertaining, but it doesn't have any of the supernatural elements that I actually enjoyed from Bake. Which leads me to my second recommendation of Rascal Dreams of Bunder Senpai. That series took what I liked about Bakemonogatari and then just fixed a lot of the things that I didn't like. But I'll get into that a bit more tomorrow, because you voters decided that for this year's Review Week of Awesome, I should review them back to back. Oh boy. And lastly, I do want to give a very special thank you to my patrons who not only support my work in general, but who also allow me to do what I do. I love and appreciate you all. Specifically though, as I like to do, I want to give particular shoutouts to patrons: Calhoun Boy, Richard Emile Bradley, Hector Montemayor, Siri Yamako, Ryfen Bonaparte, and Rune Jacobson for being especially awesome. You guys are great, and until next time, ladies, gentlemen, and others, watch more anime, and stay frosty.